Welcome to part 2 of our 5.3 lesson. In this part of the lesson, we're going to look a little closer at these graphs that we drew in the first part of the lesson. So I'm looking at this red and green graph that I drew. Now, you may notice that it has a really special relationship. Maybe you don't see it yet. Let me see if I can help. If I draw this diagonal line right here, and we call this diagonal line the y equals x line. Now, can you see a special relationship between that red and green graph across that purple line? You can see that these graphs are reflections across that purple line. And in fact, inverses always will be. An inverse graph will always reflect across that diagonal line. So if you're given a graph and the question is find the graph of the inverse, you draw that diagonal line, reflect it across, and then look for the graph that looks like that. It's always a reflection across that diagonal line. So we're actually going to skip ahead in the notes a little bit right here to this question on the next page, where we're going to practice this a little bit. So right here we have an equation. We want to graph it, and we're going to graph the inverse. So we're going to do this by using a table, just like we did in the first video. So in the first table, I'm going to have x and y, and this is going to be the y table. The second table is going to be x and y, but this one's going to be the y inverse table. By the way, little note right here, inverse can be denoted with this little -1 up in the corner. So instead of writing y inverse, I could have also written it like that. Means the same thing. Now, we're going to focus on this first table first, right there. I want to fill this in. Now, for the x's on this first table, I can pick any numbers that I want. Doesn't particularly matter. So let's pick whole numbers, make it easier on ourselves. We don't want to pick decimals or fractions. And let's pick some negatives and some positives just so we kind of get a feel for both. So let's do these numbers. So we kind of just get to pick some numbers. Now what I'm going to do is plug these numbers that I picked into the equation that was given to me. So we're going to start with that -2. So plug it into the equation. -7 times -2 is a +14. So I get 3 plus 14 is 17. Now let's plug in -1. -7 times -1 is a +7. So 3 plus 7 is 10. Plug in 0. -7 times 0 is 0. So that just leaves with 3. That's not too bad. Plug in 1. -7 times 1 is -7. So 3 minus 7 is -4. And then plug in 2. So -7 times 2 is -14. 3 minus 14 is -11. And then just like last time, I'm going to graph it. Now we have to get all the way up to 17. So let's go by 4s on this graph. That will get us all the way up to 17. And I'm going to do it on both. And you'll see why in just a second. So let's plot these. Just like last time, I'm going to do this original one in red so we can kind of see the difference. So the first one is -2, 17. So -2, 17, about there. -1, 10, right there. 0, 3, about there. 1, comma, -4, so that would be there. And then 2, comma, -11, be about there. Then I can connect them. Okay, so that's the graph of y, the original. Now let's graph the inverse. Remember, inverses, you always just take the x and y and you flip them. So we're going to take all these points from this first table and we're going to flip them. So the -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 now go on the right instead of the left. And the 17, 10, 3, -4, and -11 now go on the left instead of the right. So I flipped it all, and now let's graph it. So just like we did in the first video, I'm going to do this inverse in green so that you can kind of tell them apart. So this first one, I've got 17, comma, -2. So 17, comma, -2 right there. 10, comma, -1. So 10, -1 about there. 3, comma, 0. So there. -4, comma, 1. -4, comma, 1 there. And then -11, comma, 2. So about like that. And just like last time, I'm going to connect them all. Ta-da! That is the graph of the original and its inverse. And just like we saw with the first one, you can see right here, I can draw that magical diagonal line, that y equals x line. And if I go from the red to the green, they're reflected across that magic purple line. Those graphs will always have that special relationship. So that is it for graphing inverse functions. In the last video for today's lesson, we're going to talk about solving inverse equations.